Welcome to Redbeard Radio. I'm Brian Keith, and today we have John Robb back for the fourth time. John, welcome back.
Thanks, Brian. I'm a repeat offender, I guess.
You're the fourth time guest, and why that is extra funny is that while we mostly talk about better systems to deploy in your business here, our conversations, John, are about more big picture stuff. Our first conversation was about how networked tribes govern through alignment. And if you listened to that episode, then the last half year, 9 months would have been less mysterious to you. Our second conversation was about how to transcend tribalism in yourself, your families, and your friends. If you'd listened to that episode, you would have had a more sane way of looking at the world. And then our third episode was about consensus reality, what it is and why we need to build a new one. And again, this helps people listen to that understand the world better and get a better grasp and a better handle on what's going on. But all three of those, compared to today's topic, I find relatively comprehensible, simple, straightforward ideas because you just released a report on your Patreon, which folks, if you're not subscribed to John's Patreon, you are missing out. If someone's not part of your Patreon and I'm talking about some of these ideas, I have to dumb myself down to get at the same level where I can talk to people who are not reading your material. So I really encourage people, patreon.com/JohnRobb. But today's episode, we're talking about societal artifacts. And I read your report you released just a few days ago. And I thought, man, this is such a big idea. And I can tell how in the 2030s, this is going to be really important. And here we are in 2021. So I want to start thinking about this now. So I got a good decade to sort of think about it and get ready. And that's the stage, folks. And if that sounds very vague, that's okay. Because by the end of this episode, you're going to have a better idea about what the 2030s are going to look like and a better idea about how to organize your business so you're prepared for that big change. With all that said, John, can you give us a high-level view, of what a societal artifact is in the language you're using?
It is a technological construct that is cohesive, that is multidimensional, that compresses data and reduces steps to do things, and that is at the scale of what we do, what we think in terms of society, whether it's all social interactions, a technological artifact that runs the entire economy, technological artifact that runs the entire financial system, or a combination of the financial system and the economy. It's cohesive.
Before those last two things, I was thinking, great, Catholic Church for a long time. Catholic Church organized society. It helped us work together because it gave us rules. It told us how to behave. It told us who wasn't behaving. It helped us align ourselves so we could get stuff done. But then you started adding in economy and all that, these bigger scale things. And that part feels like it's beyond what we've been doing with religion for a long time.
We see artifacts all the time. I mean, archaeological digs and somebody pulls up an artifact which has some technology in it, has some culture in it. I mean, we're surrounded right now by artifacts, everything from toasters to televisions to smartphones to cars. We build them as tools. And as soon as we got networking, and we started to network them together, we started building these artifacts that do horizontal slices of things. And we use them in finance, like social networking is an artifact. It connects us all. We all have a little bit of it. We interact with it. It makes things simpler and easier. And it compresses the amount of data that's needed to do anything. And it reduces the steps. So for instance, I could connect with somebody using social networking. I can find them very easily by typing in their name and searching for them. And then I offer to connect. And once we're connected, then we can chat. We can then initiate a voice call, talk in audio. We do a video call. We could share location information. We could track each other. We do, at the family level, often using these tools. You can keep on adding things to that horizontal slice, that initial connection. It reduces all these steps necessary to do them. When I'm talking about a societal artifact, I'm talking about not just a horizontal slice, something that grows from that and becomes something at the scale of what we see with a society or an economy.
So we're looking at, in some ways, the company town writ large. The company town, by which I mean back when we had mining towns where there was a company store, the company owned all the land. There's that song, 16 Tons. Are you familiar with that?
Yep.
It's one of my favorite songs to sing. It's all about the company owns everything. All you can do is work for the company. Your children will work for the company. You can't afford to leave. You're just part of this system, and the system organizes everything. So you're talking about that, but you're talking about it not at a individual mining town level, but at a society-wide level?
I think whether it's a company town or whether it is a decentralized system depends on how it gets built.
Yeah.
Wrote about social networking back in 96. Somehow I stumbled into becoming an internet analyst in 95. And I was ex-military, special ops and stuff. And I just could write. And I had gone to business school and they brought me in and I ended up becoming one of the top internet analysts at the time because I saw these things put together. And I wrote a social networking report describing what it did. And people were like, I want to build that, but I don't know how, or why would anyone want to do that? It felt right, but it was still really, really early. And I'm kind of in that same space here. And I happened to read an article from my friend Jordan Hall, and he was writing about crypto. And he had mentioned this idea of a self-organizing collective intelligence forming around crypto that had all these minds involved, and they were all working on this project. And it was sucking all of the talent from Wall Street. Anyone who had any kind of technical expertise or ambition, you can go through the Wall Street meat grinder and make a mint, or you can come to crypto and you can make a mint faster, make $1 billion even, right? You never could do that on Wall Street unless you're the elite of the elites. They were solving this problem of finance. I started thinking about it and I went in and started looking at the dynamics of it. It hit me that this was a system that had figured out a way to finance discovery. That was important because when you look at big changes, and I ran into that in my personal life, trying to build technologies that were way ahead of the time, is that in order to make those big leaps, you have to do a lot of discovery. It's not straightforward.
Before we hop into discovery, I'd love to go give a specific thing for the people working on crypto can solve big problems. One of the big crypto projects is decentralized finance, or DeFi. And the basic idea, folks, is that instead of having money in the bank, and then the bank gets free money from the Federal Reserve and then loans it out and charges you interest for the money they don't pay any interest on. Instead of that the money you have in the bank, if it's actually crypto, you can then loan out that crypto in a way that is all based on technological rule sets that don't depend on the courts or judges or politicians. And you can make interest on those loans so that if you wanted to go start a business, you could just take out a loan through a DeFi function. And then you're paying directly to other individuals' interest, and you're cutting out the banks entirely. That's why the Bowtied Bowl Twitter account, their whole mantra is banks are zeros, because they're working on making DeFi completely normalized. Imagine when DeFi is as normalized as having Facebook on your phone is now, where all your money is always making you money for everyone without any middleman. That's the kind of really big problem that's not really a reality yet. You can't just go get a DeFi loan really easily, and not everyone knows how to do it in the same way we all know how to open up Facebook. But that's the kind of big problem we're talking about here, where you can imagine in a world in which there are no banks because it's no longer relevant, that the world and how the world is organized and how we relate to each other is going to be really different than it is today. And it's not obvious how. So with that said, John, let's hop into that discoverability and how do you discover the new things?
Just to hop on the decentralized finance, it could be as simple as I want to transfer $1,000 to somebody in Afghanistan. And you can do that using Bitcoin. You could just do it in person to person without any intermediaries. No one telling you how to do it. No one charging you fees, et cetera. It's like very, very simple.
And no central banks involved, which means there's no longer an ability to borrow money into existence to fund the forever wars, which is one of the huge promises of DeFi. You can actually have credit cards, do your banking, but without funding the wars. And that will change the whole world if we stop the wars like that.
And there's also lots of work on contracts done in software that allow you to pull off the shelf the kind of contracts that would make things, almost anything possible, any kind of social structure possible, any kind of financing arrangement or interaction. It can simplify an entire process. It can compress it, reduce the steps. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. So when I'm talking about discovery, with really complex things, you can't just set goals. You can't get from here to there by planning alone or optimizing that path that you're traveling. The simple stuff, sure, you can set a goal and then you can optimize your path to getting it and get better and better at whatever skill set you're trying to achieve or learn, or achieving a specific milestone in terms of amount of money that you want to save. But more complex things, you don't know what you don't know. And there's lots of different things that may be necessary to make that possible, particularly when it comes to making a leap in technology, like building social networking or building a software-based company. Is that you have to discover all sorts of building block technologies that aren't obvious when you start off. There's a couple ways to actually discover those technologies. We have developed them recently. Of course, there's open source development where a bunch of people come together to build a technology and find all the different applications for it and tweak it based on their interest in doing so. It scratches their itch. It makes them happy to do development and innovate. Problem with it, it's not funded, so people do it during their spare time. Do it when you have extra cognitive cycles that you can apply to it. That limits its speed to a certain extent. I mean, makes it very, very fast in terms of the amount of innovation you get. If people are really, really motivated to do so, like we see in warfare, you can apply it to warfare as well as software. That gets us to the second method that has really, really sped up innovation, venture capital industry in the US. It really, really came into its own with the internet, with the Netscape IPO. A lot of money being poured into different companies at the very, very early stages and exploring all the different facets of a different technology, all the different ways of applying it, all the different ways of building it. It allows you to kind of explore the entire discoverable space, the potential space for a tech very, very quickly. But the problem, of course, with that is that the venture capitalists are constrained by traditional finance considerations, and they're relatively unimaginative in many ways. So they put a limit or a damper on fast things can go. I mean, you can't fund something that can't make money.
Do you recall the story of James J. Hill?
No.
Back in the days of the railroads first crossing the U.S., there were 3 government-funded entities going after it. And at the time, a cross-continental railroad was a pipe dream. It was so expensive, though the opportunity, if you could do it, would be huge. This is before roads. So you had to go to get freight from San Francisco to New York. You had to go around Argentina, right? Like, this is a long time ago. There was one guy who said, I'm going to go do it privately. And I'm going to go do it through the north, which everyone said this guy's crazy. And James J. Hill made the Great Northern Railroad by amassing a huge amount of wealth and then made this railroad. If you hear the Burlington Northern Santa Fe, which owns most of the rail companies in the United States, BNSF, Northern is from the Great Northern Railroad. And he was the one who was successful initially. But he had this vision to go do this, but it relied on one guy, right? One guy marshaling all this energy, which is sort of like the days of, Spain's going to go explore the New World. Well, okay, so you have to have the person in control of the crown. That person has to have the vision so they can say, go do this. You're counting on a few people where you think about how Wall Street organizes money. How many people at Goldman Sachs are actually making decisions around really risky new ventures? Some, more than one, but not that many.
Right.
And then you're talking about venture capital. Okay, now it's dozens and hundreds of people are deciding which risky bets to make. So it's better than having a monarch or just James J. Hill, but it's still quite constrained compared to how much talent actually exists who might make good decisions if they were in the position to make those decisions.
Oh, exactly. And, that's why these new innovation systems are so cool. The open source, venture capital, and the third one that just seemed to explode out of nowhere is the crypto. Unlike the other two, crypto found a way to get people excited about the potential of the system, using this coin architecture. And the people working on crypto are getting wealthy and funding themselves and hiring more people or bringing more people in because they're getting wealthy working on it and discovering new applications of it and discovering new ways to use it. It's a wild methodology. The more you work on it, the more you improve it, the more you improve the whole system, the wealthier you get. It's a different world and it's moving ahead very, very quickly. And so I put this new exploration system that's rapidly finding all of the different things that are really interesting and needed to build a complete financial system that's different and substantially better than the existing system. And this self-organizing collective intelligence from Jordan Hall, I was trying to figure out what they're building. I mean, it's one thing to say you have this like dynamic in place. It's another thing what it's actually building and that's tangible. It's clear to me that there was like an arc in technology. If you look back in history, the two things that were growing exponential forever are population and technological improvement. Even when there's like regional downturns or collapses, technology continued to advance somewhere. Just a pretty clear exponential ramp. But, population now is peaked outside of Africa and it's already slowed down. The only thing that continues to increase is tech. So we're talking about something that would be bigger and better. And what would that be? Another clue came to me from Marshall McLuhan, who was talking about social networking and electronic technologies retribalizing us. That would be a disaster if we couldn't find a way to mitigate it, control it. And his suggestion was that we build a societal artifact, something big that can manage and mitigate all human interaction. Then I started looking at AIs, and AIs seem to be not as developing as human equivalent intelligences. They look more like glue, something that goes in the space between us, something that works as a kind of a way to scale these complex systems that we're thinking about building, these artifacts. I was thinking about NFTs, these non-fungible tokens. It really is just a way to tag something as unique. In the digital space, it's like a way to tag a meme or a picture or a song or anything and say that that is the original copy. Typically, it's not attached to any kind of intellectual property rights, but it could be. But it is the unique and verified and trusted version of it, which has a lot of use in that. But if you apply it to, say, physical objects, it's possible to maybe tag everything in the physical space, every object, every artifact that we've built as something unique. And if you could tie those all together, you start to create things that can never be built using the existing system. You start adding financial layers, you start adding marketplace layers. And if those are all in software, if you build new contracts and contracts can be stitched together, you could start to build things in the economic and financial realms that are wildly different than what we have now and offer levels of compression and reduction in steps and new degrees of freedom, being able to do things you couldn't do before in many different ways using this technology. It was clear to me that that was the way we're headed, is towards something like that, and that it could emerge very, very quickly using these innovation systems. So you following me on that so far?
Yeah, and I just want to call out here, including tokenizing people's time. Scott Adams came out with WinHub a while ago, which I'm not sure if it's really taken off yet, but the idea of you can contact any expert on any topic, pay them by the minute, straight from your phone, immediate access. And at some point, that idea will take off more, where if you want to know from what's wrong with these muffins I'm making to fix this landing page for me, it'll all be immediately available, bought per the minute. We look at tokenizing time and having an NFT for time. I might say, okay, well, my rate for one-on-one coaching is $500 an hour during my normal call times. But if you really want to have me for a weekend, then here's this other rate. Well, okay, that's sort of simple right now to just put that on your website. You can imagine when everyone's time who opts in to participate is an NFT for every different thing. Okay, if you want me to be a podcast guest at 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, that's some certain amount of time for that particular activity at a particular time from me or in a particular location.
I consulted with a bunch of NFT crypto guys about 6 months ago, and we talked exactly about that, tokenizing time, about systems to do that. My idea was just a slightly different. It was like a way to really kick it off was to pick two people you want to have talk, any two people in the world. And then you have people tokenize it, and then you have people invest in it. And if it gets to a certain level, the company will approach those people and say, do you want to talk? Here's what you'll make if you talk. It's a way to get like a high profile version of this going very, very quickly and get people speculating.
And scalable. What we've seen so far, we've seen in the political arena, occasionally you'll see some politician or political figure say, hey, I wanted to go debate so-and-so. And if you do this, I'll go donate X amount to this nonprofit.
Right.
And that's great as a media stunt, but it's not scalable. But we can imagine, let's say in my local neighborhood, I live in a place where fireworks were banned, and also some people were setting off fireworks and some other people were complaining on Facebook about it. That's not optimal for society. That's not a great way. So would I like to have my neighbor who is complaining about the fireworks and my neighbor who is lighting off fireworks spend 10 minutes talking about it? Maybe this is not a great example, but if I believe that would improve the health of my neighborhood, and if I had a function where I could say, okay, I'm going to go put in $10 and then say to all my neighbors, whoever wants that, go put in $10.
Right.
And then the people in the conversation can choose to either split it between themselves, and they might get paid $50 or $100 to have a 10-minute conversation with the neighbor. If I think, and enough of my neighbors think, that's an important thing to do.
And they're rational enough to talk to each other versus scream at each other.
And it may be hiring a moderator as well. The idea of NFTs is that there's a future in which I might say, well, I want these two neighbors to talk to each other, but I have another neighbor, John, who I know he would be a great facilitator. He's very calm, very relaxed. And if that neighbor facilitated a 10-minute conversation, oh my goodness. But right now, I don't have a way to do that besides trying to verbally persuade people who don't see eye to eye. This is a very simple example with very few moving parts, right? When you look at a more complex example, it might be that you want to go do something with your company where you want to have access to a certain number of people. And you might say, hey, I want to go get access to Redbeard for the whole weekend for not more than 3 hours, but available at any time over this 48-hour sprint. And you're going to do the same thing with 20 other experts. And then you're going to have, for a manageable cost, everyone immediately available, 5 minutes notice in case I'm sleeping. And then suddenly you can say, okay, so for a $100,000 bill, you can have 20 experts available. I don't know what the price would be, just putting it out there. Then now you can build a company and have all your experts immediately available. Or what about for healthcare? If you have any healthcare problem right now, what do? You either call your doctor or you go and you chat with a person you hope is a human at your health insurance company. When instead you can say, I'm part of this network where I can immediately talk to a human because I'm just paying as part of that system.
There are a lot of limitations with the old system. Most of the stuff that we do, no matter what big system we're talking about, there are bureaucracies, there's slow processes, there's paperwork that needs to be done, et cetera, et cetera. It's like when you're talking about an artifact, once it gets a critical mass, then it starts to build its own gravity and it bumps into things and it sucks them in. A much bigger and much more disruptive version of what we saw with the internet early on. You know, Vid Cerf, one of the early inventors of the internet, he had a t-shirt that said, I pee on everything.
Excellent.
Kind of a technical humor, near to humor. His goal was to kind of connect everything to the internet, and then it is transformed to a certain degree by being connected. And that you can, modify the features of shopping and how you do lots of different activities by bringing it online. The artifact brings that up to another level. It interconnects processes, and it does so in a way that once it gets sucked in, it gets compressed into nothingness. It's like a black hole squeezes it down into nothing. Is that almost anything you want to do in that system is one step. Really, really, really plug dumb simple. It could end up with two different ways that this is rolled out, is that you could have a state or a set of corporations jumping onto this and then wrangling it and using it as a kind of a dictatorial system, and then siphoning off of the economy of finance at levels that we haven't seen historically, and then controlling people in a way that makes them dependent on it. You can see the start of that emerging in China. You can see a little bit of that in the US with corporations, the big tech companies in particular, particularly when it involves social networking. But the alternative is that this artifact, particularly the one coming out of crypto, is so complex and there's so many moving parts that it generates gravity in a way that's not controllable. It creates function and degrees of freedom that make it impossible for any single company to control. And that may have the opposite effect in terms of how it changes us. It may shatter us to an extent that it allows us to, as small groups or individuals, go off in a myriad of different directions.
For folks who have not read, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson describes a future in which there are huge numbers of tribes and they're no longer geographically focused, where you might cross a block and now you've moved from this tribe to that tribe and you're under different laws. Everything's changed.
You could add on virtual governance and you can add on different roles of different groups, and you can be a member of many different groups. I like the book from Bruce Sterling called Schismatrix.
I'm not familiar. I'll have to read it.
Yeah, it's back from the 80s. That kind of gives you a kind of an intuitive gut feel for what happens when things just explode and we all go off in different directions. And everything from the body modification to the incorporation of tech, way you run your society, splintering with wide and growing gaps between everybody, much more pronounced than Snow Crash's cultural gaps. That kind of artifact is wild because I think it's going to be a ton more articulated in the sense that it will allow us to do so much more than the top-down dictated ones.
It seems likely that we won't actually know what's happening until we get there. In the same way that hearing a story this week from a high school person I vaguely knew tell a story about her experience in high school. And if you'd told us back when you were advising people on social networking, you'd said, well, what's going to happen is people are going to use this tool to reframe emotional experiences 20 years after they've been in school together and get to have adult perspective on their teenager experiences. We don't really know what impact that has. What's the quote about reality is stranger than fiction, that it's more than we can imagine right now?
It wipes out existing stuff when these new systems, particularly these new artifacts, emerge. We saw that in the way that, social networking has wiped out a lot of the newspapers and a lot of what we do on standard telephones. And then it opens up new things. Twitter is, where we have a kind of a national or global discussion about what is news. I mean, that's where news is made. We get to see the sausage making and where it's spun and where it's put into narratives that then replay on the evening news and in the big papers. It's transformative. It's often scary. I mean, right now you can't even think of a political race, a major one, occurring entirely outside of social network. I look at, say, Trump, and if he's disconnected from Twitter and Facebook and other things, there's no way he's a viable candidate.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're on the platform, interacting with it, gaming it, leveraging it, you're not viable. So there's transformations that occur that are changing fundamental things about society and making new things possible by their emergence.
And new rule sets.
Right.
We used to have an idea about when was it appropriate to shun someone. And I'm reminded of stories, some of my family's from the South, stories of a long time ago, back when in the South, at least in some areas, if you beat your wife, as if you were a guy who beat your wife, a group of guys, the KKK, would show up and tell you that's not going to happen again. And if you beat your wife again, they were going to show up and kill you. That was, in some places, the KKK was a social enforcement that went beyond the law, did what the law could not do, and gave very real penalties for abusing your wife. That story isn't really told nowadays.
In the North, it would be churches or just groups of people that would show up kind of ad hoc.
There we go. So we had social control mechanisms by deciding this behavior is out of bounds, this behavior is in bounds, and there's the gray area. And now we hear stories about crime where, no one went to help or stop the criminal. Well, I'll tell you a story. I was in Morocco once, and I was going with my guide to this ATM to get some money out, and I had left my suitcase in the middle of this pedestrian road. And so I went back to grab it. He said, well, you didn't need to go grab that. And I said, I'd just like to have it next to me. And he says, if anyone stole your suitcase, they would be tackled by the time they got down to the end of the block, and the cops would be all over them. And I said, really? Because where I'm from, no one would tackle the thief, because if they did, the thief would get free lawyers and take the house of the person who tackled them. And my host lives in Morocco, just looked at me like, oh my good, he couldn't believe me.
Right.
That in America, it's too dangerous to tackle a thief. It's too dangerous to stop a crime. Well, that's because our societal artifacts that worked inconsistently but worked overall 100 years ago have broken, and now stopping crime is really dangerous. Got to rely on the professionals. It's now even dangerous to be a professional stopping crime. The part of the promise of the societal artifact is saying things like, when is it appropriate to completely disconnect someone from the network?
Hopefully that's what an artifact will make possible, is that you can build opt-in contracts, opt-in governance, opt-in basic standards of conduct.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of what we're seeing today is a kind of maximal rule set based on some extreme version of reality, and they're trying to impose it on everybody, which is not working. People are resisting it. What we really do need is, though, a basic minimal level rule set. Think of it kind of like the way the internet spread, is that if you follow these basic rules, these minimal rules, you can connect to the internet. If you make your packets in a certain way, and if you hook up to DNS, if your network conforms to these standards, it'll work. Or if you build your web pages using HTML based on these standards, it'll work. You can't use HTML, you can't use this, you got to use this simple stuff. That's the same way that we get from where we're at right now, and increasingly diverse population in the United States and connected to the rest of the world with all their different religions and cultures and everything else, is how do we build a rule set of basic human conduct that can go everywhere? And it has to be minimal, has to be basic. And it could be enforceable using a system like this, and it could be opt-in versus forced in. And you opt into it because there's advantages to opting into it. The people in there will adhere to it, and you can then, because of that trust, not have to worry about things like, will your bag be stolen?
At a very simple level, I'm a paying member of Greg Jenkins' Monkey Pod Grove, which is the funnest place on Facebook. It's a group of a couple hundred business people, which if folks want to explore it, it's at monkeypodmarketing.com/redbeard. There's my affiliate link to get in there. But once you're in that group, which costs you almost nothing to join, now you have access to a whole bunch of people, including me. And I also ask questions in there where I get the thoughts and the spirit energy of people who would cost a lot of money to go hire on an hourly basis to answer a question. And they get that from me. So it's at a very simple level. I pay a little bit of money. I follow Greg's rules because it's his club. And now his network has access to me. And if you were always in there, always taking, that wouldn't work very well. You have to have a reciprocity, right? That's part of the rule set, is you're going to give what you can give.
Right.
But we can imagine taking that out of the relatively very easy to understand business group. We're going to go explore that. So we're going to expand it out to everything.
That brings up an interesting thing that comes out of the crypto world. If that is the innovation space that emerges or creates this new societal economy or financial artifact, or a single societal artifact that encompasses everything, that can expand globally, is that it may include some of the mechanisms it is using currently to explore, to incentivize people to explore the potential space of crypto finance. What I mean by that is that it may be based on coins or networks that you as a participant own a piece of. You own an increasing piece of it the more you use it. And if the valuation of that goes up, you get the benefits of that. It would be like, okay, say if you're in the United States and we've seen the economy go up 400% in the last 25, 30 years. I mean, no one has seen their incomes go up 400%, yet the economy's grown that much. We've seen maybe 70% increase. That counts for inflation and a little bit extra, a little bit less. But we really haven't seen that kind of increase in our wallets. We're not equity participants. And when I say equity, I mean the good kind of equity. I mean, when they talk about equity online, often it's like we all deserve the same outcomes no matter how much you put into it. The good kind of equity is that if we all participate in putting effort into it, if that thing increases in value, we all benefit. That is really important in this kind of networked, loosey-goosey environment, is that it's very easy to lose trust in something. And we're seeing kind of a loss in trust in the US economy, the US experts in finance and business. A lot of that can be alleviated or mitigated by having equity in the system.
I think about the colonial days when most people were farmers, most farmers owned their farms. This is in America. And unlike where most people were serfs on someone else's land back home, wherever the home was, in America, the average person owned their own farm. And so they had a huge stake in, down to simple as keeping weeds out and how they're managing their fields, how they're dealing with the possibility of fires, that they were very responsible to each other, to their neighbors. If your crop neighbors mine, because our fields are neighbors, and your crop gets a disease and you don't deal with it, or your cows get a disease and you don't deal with it, that could kill my cows. And then we're both starving this winter and our children are going to die. So we're very oriented because we're both owners in the same system. And what we're seeing with crypto and the possibilities there is creating a new system. I even think about your Global Gorillas community on Patreon. There's a dude. He is renting space from someone else to go run the payment processing in the discussion area. And then we contribute. And I think, well, okay, well, what if there was some system where maybe it's unfair to use your system? I should use my system, the Redbeard Accelerator, where there's a dude, me, who rents space through Slack, through Zoom, whatever, and members join in to help grow their businesses. So they're paying in, but they don't own any part of it, right?
Right.
That we can imagine a system where if you meet the criteria and you're welcomed and now you own part of the system, that could create a different kind of environment. It's a different kind of commitment level, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's more like a marriage.
Everyone's heard of barn raisings. A new couple wants to get started on their farm and they have to, build a barn, and it's a tough, expensive process. And people come in, a community comes in and raises that barn. And the reason why people do that is that it improved the community. It made another strong pillar in the community. It made them productive. It made them contributors. It made the community stronger by having them stronger. And if you're tied to other people, their improvement in strength makes you stronger. It goes back to even tribes before we had the kind of the barter economy, quid pro quo. I put something in and you have to give me equal value back. Typically, when tribes did that, that was only done with enemies. So our economy was based on how people interacted economically with enemies, and we scaled it. We figured we worked on ways of making it work. But inside the tribe, you were willing to give people things and gift people things in order to improve their ability to hunt, to live, to exist. And you expected them to do that with others. Your status increased the more you gave. It's because you had a long-term stake in their success, that you were going to be with these people, and their success determined whether you lived or died. You're willing to actually make those contributions. And, there's a change in dynamic when you start to have a stake in things. You trust it. You trust other people who are contributing towards it. And if we had that kind of system in the US, say COVID comes in, if you decided to solve it in part by treating it as an information problem, you could build an amazing tracking and an information app and a decision-making app that uses GPS data and all sorts of testing data, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That would allow you to reduce your exposure levels and reduce your risk. And then if everybody was participating in it, it would make COVID really a non-problem, because it would reduce the propagation below 1, and it would snuff itself out very, very quickly by people making better decisions. But we can't have a system like that because no one trusts anybody enough to hand over that data. They don't see the benefit into them putting that in. They feel like they're going to get ripped off, abused.
Well, yeah, they see the risk.
Oh, yeah, they see it.
I think about obesity. We have data that says that it's not just that having an obese friend makes you more obese. It's that having a friend who has an obese friend makes you more likely to be obese. That is now rock solid data. Once you understand that, then how do you go track which of your friends have obese friends? Because if you don't want diabetes, your best bet is to not have any friends who have obese friends.
Or that you have a stake in the success and longevity of your friends' friends. You're willing to help them and invest in them.
Yeah.
But it's like until you have that system that binds you together in kind of a minimalist way, made possible potentially by an artifact like this, using kind of the crypto philosophy of things. It's not this everything's done at arm's length and your success has no bearing on my success. It's a static pie. And if I get a bigger piece, I'm going to do better, even if you lose. That you can recreate yourself every single time you do something bad. You disappear from whatever you did with that group and you go on to another group and treat it like another set of patsies. That kind of thing is common in this society. The more we globalize, the more we loosen it up, the more we make it dynamic, the worse it gets. The worse the abuse gets, the lower the level of trust. A corrective to that is to build these systems that tie us together.
Imagine a novel tribe where when you join in, it costs you a lot in some fashion to join in. But then, absent breaking a list of very harsh rules like murder, you can't be kicked out. Now, that's sort of what we used to have as a society when we could say, what does it mean to be American? And everyone would have a similar-ish answer. Or what does it mean to go to this particular church? But now we're so atomized. What would it look like to have a tribe where you join in and now you're stuck with these people? They're not about to go away tomorrow. It's like your blood family, right? Except across more of your, maybe where you currently physically live, even if your family is far away, maybe across your peer group, your neighbors, the people you work with, and just being all part of a tribe. It's the idea of the polis to some extent. The Greek city-state is how we translate it now. But it was more than that, right? It was we are together. We are all Spartans or Thebans or Thessalonians or whatever together. We know who we are and we're all bought in, that you don't stop being from this particular polis just because someone else doesn't like you, at least most of the time.
Oh, yeah. And then using an artifact at the societal scale with this kind of methodology would allow you to build multiple tribes or be member of multiple tribes. Unlike in the past where you'd only be member of one, you could be a member of many, some just very narrowly focused on a given profession, where you live, different aspects of your life that are mutually exclusive with those other things. Or they all overlap. The beauty is that you can create these things, these connections, because a system will allow you to tie it together. Right now, you can't do it easily. You can do it in kind of a little bit of a kludgy way using the tools available. But that kind of level of dynamism in society and in our economy and our financial system is coming. We're talking about the societal artifacts, how they're evolving and how these innovation systems are exploring all the potential space. That's the reason why crypto hasn't really developed anything that's like applicable to anything. It's just pure exploration. Is that when it clicks in, when it becomes real, it becomes like this singularity. It just hits. It can change things very, very quickly as it sucks stuff up. Just be prepared if you see something emerging really quickly and everyone's kind of flowing into it. Like, for instance, if this new economy, this crypto economy gives you an equity stake in it, in its growth. If you get in early, you may do better. And that people could flow in the billions trying to get a piece of that to grow with it as it grows. And they put more and more of their work on and more of their interactions on there and more of their business flows onto it. If you're one of the early players, like if you bought Bitcoin back when I started looking at it, playing with it, back when it was $1.50. I even have a couple coins from back then. Yeah, yeah.
Beautiful.
If you were part of that early on, you would have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in your pocket. Your life would be transformed. Be prepared to see something like that emerge. And if it does, jump in.
And I'd say look for opportunities to invest what is non-scalable. That while it's not clear which of these upcoming networks and artifacts are going to succeed, and it's always possible you could invest in the wrong one, there will be some that'll do better than others. And where you can put in non-scalable energy and really commit, I would say, even treat it like a tribe. I'm a member of Podcasters Paradise. That's John Lee Dumas's membership for podcasters. It's a great community, great information there, great training on things. I am not as committed as I could be. I could be in there every day answering questions. I could show up to every live they do. I could say I'm highly aligning myself with this community. For some people, that's probably the right answer, is to say, you know what, I really believe in JLD. I'm going to go buy some of his coin on BitClout. I'm going to go join Podcasters Paradise. I'm going to go invest in the JLD brand, but also have through BitClout a part of the ownership stake. I'm part of something like 6 business networks, one of which is mine, which I own, right? 5 of which I'm a paying member. I'm active in building my brand, but also supporting that community. Like, what have I done today? I'm talking about, hey, Greg Jenkins, Monkey Pod Grove. I'm a paying member. You should go join that, people listening, because it's going to make the network stronger. And my benefit from being a part of the network gets bigger when smart people join. I talked about Podcasters Paradise. Hey, folks, you should go join that, right? You should go give JLD money. I don't have an equity stake at all, but my network gets better when smart people join that.
Cool thing about crypto is it has the potential to add equity to everything that you're doing. Every horizontal slice, everything, every business thing you're involved in, every financial thing, a lot of private and personal things, hobbies and things like that could be turned into a type of equity because it could become valuable because it's producing valuable output. As more people go in and add to it, it becomes extraordinarily valuable. If that does take off, it comes back to something I was working on. I mean, I kind of saw this. I stumbled into this when I was back in 2010 when I was working on what I called an open source venture. And I was looking at reorganization after the financial crisis and trying to figure out new ways to use software to build a better economy. And I thought about a company that was built in software that would track people building something that was extremely valuable. And in my mind, it would build a database of pictures of every object in the world, right? Every unique object should have a picture. And it should have meta tags on it. And that if anyone wanted to look that up, it would be like the ultimate in finding something, example of something, and seeing it and finding out details on it. And that it could be built through a software-based architecture of a company where everyone who wants to contribute could contribute. And if there's any kind of money to be made on the system through advertising or whatever, because imagine if Wikipedia had advertising on it, it would be generating incredible amounts of money. Mm-hmm. Imagine if it paid the people who were putting the pages together. It could be employing hundreds of thousands. But in this case, building this database would have been amazing for AI development, would have been amazing for a resource increasing in value the bigger it got. And that the people who put in time, I thought they should get an equity stake based on that contribution. It would be measurable. You can analyze qualitatively all through software. And that initial thing would be maybe $2 an hour. But as it accumulated value over time, you'd accumulate, say, $100 an hour, 3 or 4 or 5 years in for that same hour that you put in previously, because you're getting this royalty stream, this financial flow. Or it could be all flowed into equity and then you become very, very expensive in terms of valuation. And you could get incredible amounts of money just from selling pieces of that valuation. Yeah, that kind of made me look for things like that would be developing out there in the real world as crypto develops and as it explores the financial and economic space. It is very possible that they will use the same thing that's funding that exploration as part of the system that they build. And that will be the thing that makes it so attractive that everybody will hop in. That everybody, if you're part of a social network that has all these features and the valuation of that social network is attached to your usage of it, the same thing with the financial networks and the same thing with the economic networks. And then they're connected to all together use it as an artifact. You will join it because that participation makes you wealthy, not over the short term, but over the long term.
Generational, potentially, if you can pass down your equity.
Oh, yeah.
So let me give you folks listening a vision of what business might look like in 2030 or 2035. You might be involved in 10 networks. One of them is yours. You own it. Or maybe you're one of a small group of people who own it and it's your thing. This is what you currently think of as your business, your LLC. And then maybe you're involved in a few more networks where you have an equity stake and you're very exploratory. There's not necessarily a revenue model, and maybe even what you're building is not obvious. So maybe you have a solid final goal, as John is describing. And then maybe you're involved in a few more networks. There's less exploration and there's more monetization. Like you're learning how to do a thing or you're advising on how to do a thing, like Podcasters Paradise that I shared earlier, where it's a very specific problem space and you're participating. And if you end up being one of the most valuable people as other members judge, then maybe you get a piece of that pie. That might be what your world looks like a decade from now.
And then you might be part of like a social rule set, minimal rule set that you could apply to various ventures that people would sign on to as contractual promise or contractual obligation.
Yeah. Right now, I might use Calendly. You might use Schedule Once to go book calls. In the future, I might have, I subscribe to this legal rule set over here. And so it's really easy for people who have signed up for the same legal network to go sign contracts with me. Whereas if you're using this other rule set over there, it's like, well, we could do business together, but it's a total hassle. I'll just go find clients who already use the same rule set I do. And in that way, it's going to keep on moving back and forth. It's like, I publish on Facebook. You only publish on Twitter. I never go on Twitter. Like at that point, there's this friction, right?
Yep.
I think of a time when we have, let's say a system generates revenue and even a system someone owns. Let's say it's a system you completely own, but you say 20% of the revenue from this is going to be distributed to the top producers as judged by some criteria. And that could be as simple as every member gets a vote each month, a single vote about who is most useful to the network, who added the most value to the network this month. And then the person who gets the top, they get half of the bonus. Whoever is number 2 gets 30%. Whoever's number 3 gets 20% of the bonus. And then there's 3 spots. That's a really simple example. You can expand that out to be, the top 1,000 people who are of service to the network. As judged by their peers, they get 20% of the equity distributed among them in some fashion that's predetermined.
Right. And, all of this would be dynamic.
Yeah.
And competitive. Your network would compete with my network, or we could combine them or whatever. But, will be societies, like what's going on in China, that will impose a lot of the structure. So there won't be that dynamism. You already see what's happening in China in terms of what is the number of unicorns. These billion-dollar valuations on startups has declined to nothing. It's like a trickle now. And it's like I call it the Jack Ma effect, is that once they started arresting the billionaires, the big tech billionaires like Jack Ma, and started to impose limits on how much innovation was permissible, everything dried up. And if that's their approach with this artifact, is that they'll say, this is possible and that's not. It's possible that we'll end up with something like that here too, which is too bad.
Well, we just had Charlie Munger activity. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner, say, yeah, he thought what happened to Jack Ma was great. So on the one hand, we have the people who want to constrict access to these networks. But on the other hand, the first person who can get cell phones into the million plus, I'm going to say it wrong, but the Uyghur Muslims who are in the concentration camps in China, in Xinjiang, whoever can unlock that value first, whoever can unlock the value of all the Chinese people who are currently living under a regime that stifles innovation, whoever can connect those people in a more free system is going to unlock incredible amounts of value. And that's true everywhere. That's true for what's happening in America. Whoever can first unlock, right? It applies everywhere. The future is so bright here.
Yes.
I'm excited to see it. I want to leave people with some links to go explore these ideas more. One is on Twitter. My friend Mike Trisco. If you search Mike Trisco there, his company Four and his company Blockchain Builders deals with a lot of building cryptocurrencies and building out some of these technologies that John is talking about. His call sign there is TOHSNOOM_. So Mike Trisco, good guy to follow there. And then I also just want to read what our current guest, John Robb, has pinned on Twitter. He says, what's going on? We are being mentally rewired by the technologies of social networking. It's an involuntary process. That mental rewiring is forcing a reorganization of society. Those 3 lines right there. A lot of our heartache as individuals and our families, our friends, our nation, our world comes from not understanding that. Once you understand that we are being involuntarily mentally rewired, then you can go and give each other some grace. You can give yourself some grace. A thing is happening to us, and it's not exactly clear what's happening, and you didn't choose this, and you can't opt out. So I think everyone, go follow John Robb, at John Robb on Twitter, JOHNROBB, and go check out patreon.com/John Robb to go get that Global Gorillas report. There's way more than just the monthly report. There's also this workspace where we have all kinds of fascinating discussion. There's a Discord. There's more conversations around this. They're going to help you sort of slide into the next decade, understanding more about what's happening. If you listen to the previous John Robb episodes on Redbeard Radio, you had a much better idea of what was coming since we recorded our first one back in November of 2020. And because you listened to this episode, you're going to be in a way better position over the next decade to recognize things and go, oh, I recognize what's happening. That's what John called a societal artifact. And it has this characteristic that I heard about in that episode. So go follow John Robb. And then my last ask here, folks, is I'd love to hear your feedback on Redbeard Radio. If you go to redbeardsurvey.com, I have a few quick questions. Takes you less than 5 minutes. Let me know what's awesome. Let me know what you would like to hear less of. redbeardsurvey.com. John, thank you for being on the show for the 4th time. I am sure we will talk again soon.
Thanks, Brian. It's always a pleasure.
Take care, folks.